Fog rolled across the valley as search crews uncovered a trail no one had walked in 50 years. A torn shoe, a rusted lunchbox, a line of footprints pressed into the earth as if frozen in time. The teacher and her students hadn't just disappeared. It was as though the world itself had swallowed them whole. Welcome to Missing Shadows, the channel that uncovers the forgotten, the vanished, and the untold. Hit subscribe, because every shadow hides a story. Her name was Evelyn Carter. Back in 1972, she was only 26 years old, bright-eyed, passionate, and determined to make a difference as a history teacher in the small town of Mill Creek, Oregon. Evelyn wasn't just a teacher. She was the kind of mentor who believed in her students' dreams more than they believed in themselves. Her classroom was filled with hand-drawn maps, dusty books, and the sound of children laughing. To her, education wasn't about textbooks. It was about taking her students out into the world, letting them touch history with their own hands. But now, in 2022, Evelyn is not here to tell her story. She never came back from that field trip, and neither did her students. All that remains is her legend. The teacher who vanished with 22 children on a sunny October afternoon. Yet, Evelyn's presence lingers like a shadow over Mill Creek. Ask the old shopkeeper, and he'll remember her walking with her students down Main Street, reminding them to hold hands as cars pass by. Ask the librarian, and she'll recall how Evelyn spent evenings planning lessons, her face glowing with quiet dedication. Even Evelyn's younger sister, Margaret, now an elderly woman in her 70s, still keeps Evelyn's favorite blue scarf folded in a drawer, untouched for 50 years. For Margaret, the pain never healed. She often sits by the window, staring at the tree line where her sister was last seen. "I thought she'd walk back through the door," she once whispered in an interview, like she'd only been gone a day. Evelyn Carter is more than a missing person. She represents a wound that never closed, a story too strange to accept and too haunting to forget. And as the first trace of her class emerges in 2022, the question resurfaces: what really happened on that trip into the mountains? It was October 12, 1972, a crisp autumn morning in Mill Creek. The leaves had just begun to turn, painting the Oregon hills in shades of amber and red. The air smelled of pine and earth, and for Evelyn Carter, it felt like the perfect day for her long-awaited class field trip. She had spent weeks planning it, maps spread across her desk, lesson notes tucked into her leather satchel. The destination, Hollow Creek Gorge, a rugged trail just outside of town, where she wanted her students to experience history through the land itself. The children were thrilled. 22 wide-eyed faces climbed into the yellow school bus that morning, carrying brown paper lunches, sketch pads, and the kind of innocent excitement only children could bring. Evelyn stood at the door of the bus, greeting each one by name, reminding them to stay together. To her, this trip wasn't just an outing, it was a promise. A promise that she would guide them, protect them, and bring them all home. But by nightfall, Mill Creek would never be the same. The bus never returned. When the clock struck 7 p.m., worried parents gathered outside the school, scanning the road, waiting for headlights to appear. At first, there was reassurance. Perhaps they'd taken a longer trail or stopped for a late picnic. But as the hours stretched into dawn, reassurance twisted into dread. Search parties were sent. Police combed the trails. Helicopters circled overhead. Not a single tire track, not a single child's shoe, not even a scrap of Evelyn's lesson plans could be found. It was as if the forest had swallowed them whole. For Evelyn's family, The loss was unbearable. Her younger sister, Margaret, only 19 at the time, spent days walking the woods herself, calling Evelyn's name until her voice broke. Their mother would set an extra plate at the dinner table, unable to accept her daughter was gone. And in Mill Creek, whispers began. Some said the bus had crashed into the gorge and been carried away by the river. Others claimed something darker, that Evelyn had led the children into the woods on purpose. That she had secrets no one knew. Those rumors cut deep, and though nothing was ever proven, Evelyn's name became both a symbol of tragedy and a question mark that hung over the town for decades. 50 years later, Margaret still lives with that shadow. She never married, never left Mill Creek. Her life became a kind of vigil, keeping Evelyn's memory alive, waiting for an answer that never came. To this day, she keeps the old field trip permission slip in a small box under her bed. The ink faded, but still legible. Every October, on the anniversary of the disappearance, Margaret sits by her window, watching the hills where her sister vanished. And every year, the silence of the forest answers her the same way, with nothing. Until now, the autumn of 2022 arrived with the same colors that once filled Evelyn Carter's last morning: amber, red and gold across the Oregon hills. But for Margaret Carter, now 70, the season no longer carried beauty. To her, October was a wound that reopened every year. She expected another month of silence, another year of unanswered prayers. But fate had other plans. It began with a phone call. Margaret was sitting in her kitchen, tea cooling beside her, when the phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to Deputy Ryan Hale, a man she only vaguely knew, young, steady, and new to Mill Creek's Sheriff's Department. His tone was careful, deliberate, as if each word had weight. "Double quotes, Mrs. Carter," he said. "I think we may have found something. Something connected to 1972. Margaret's heart skipped. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. It had been 50 years since Evelyn and the children vanished, and in that time she had grown used to false leads, cruel pranks, and rumors that ended in nothing. But there was something in Hale's voice, a gravity she hadn't heard before. What did you find?" She whispered. "There's been some construction near the old Hollow Creek Gorge. Workers were clearing land for a new hiking path. They dug up what appears to be part of a vehicle. A school bus, Mrs. Carter, yellow paint, rusted but intact. We're securing the site now." Margaret's hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped the phone. For decades, she had prayed for closure, but the thought of actually facing it, of seeing the thing that carried her sister and those children away, filled her with equal parts terror and longing. That evening, she drove out to the site. The sun was setting, staining the forest in blood-orange light. Police cars lined the clearing, their sirens muted but their lights flashing like restless ghosts. She stepped carefully over the churned soil until she saw it. The curved roof of a bus, its metal eaten by rust, its windows shattered, roots crawling across it like veins. But what truly stopped her heart was the detail no one could explain. On the side of the bus, beneath decades of dirt, a faint word was visible, etched not in paint but in something deeper, scratched into the metal by a hand that had wanted to be remembered. Help. The letters were jagged, frantic, carved from the inside. Margaret pressed a hand to her mouth, her knees weakening. The weight of 50 years collapsed onto her in that moment. This wasn't just a vehicle buried by accident. This was a message, a cry that had never reached the world. Reporters would descend on Mill Creek within days. Old wounds would reopen, conspiracy theories would swirl, and every family of those lost children would return to face the nightmare they had tried to bury. But for Margaret, it was different. This wasn't just a mystery. It was her sister, and she swore, standing before that bus half swallowed by earth and time, that she would finally uncover the truth, no matter what shadows it led her into, because after 50 years of silence, the past was speaking again. The discovery of the buried bus shook Mill Creek like a thunderclap. Within days, national reporters swarmed the town, their cameras pointed at Hollow Creek Gorge, their voices speculating about what had happened in 1972. Old residents, who had long stopped speaking about the tragedy, now found themselves cornered for interviews. The little town that had tried to bury its grief beneath 50 years of silence suddenly found itself under a spotlight it had never wanted. For Margaret Carter, the attention was both unbearable and necessary. Every camera flash reminded her of the sister she had lost, but every question reignited her determination to find the truth. She knew this wasn't just about Evelyn. It was about all the families who had lived half a century with nothing but rumors and broken memories. On the second day of excavation, Margaret returned to the site. The bus was now pulled halfway out of the earth, its body mangled and scarred by time. Investigators in white suits worked carefully, photographing, cataloging, and brushing away soil as though each inch of rusted steel carried secrets. Deputy Ryan Hale greeted her at the caution tape, his face tired but earnest. "We found belongings," he said softly. "Not much. Some notebooks, a lunchbox, a pair of shoes." Margaret's throat tightened. She remembered Evelyn's handwriting, neat and graceful, always jotting down lesson notes in the margins of her books. The idea that pieces of her sister's last day were being unearthed from the soil filled her with both longing and dread. But there was something else. Ryan hesitated before adding, "We also found carvings inside. More than the word you saw. Scratches on the seats. Letters, numbers, almost like codes. We're not sure yet what they mean." Margaret's pulse quickened. Codes. She had always known Evelyn was clever, meticulous, the kind of woman who would find a way to leave behind a sign if she could. Could those carvings be her sister's last attempt at telling the world what happened? That night, Margaret sat in her small living room, surrounded by old photographs and newspaper clippings she had kept for decades. She spread them across the table like puzzle pieces. Evelyn's smiling face, the children lined up in front of the school bus before the trip, headlines screaming teacher and students lost in woods. She studied them with new eyes, searching for patterns, for anything she might have missed all these years. And then, the knock came. At her door stood a woman in her late 60s, bundled in a worn coat. Her eyes were sharp, unsettled. Margaret recognized her instantly. Clara Jennings, the mother of one of the missing boys, Timothy. They hadn't spoken in years. Grief driving too many parents into their own private worlds. "I heard about the carvings," Clara said without greeting. "They're not codes. They're warnings." Margaret's brow furrowed. "Warnings?" Clara stepped inside, lowering her voice as if the walls themselves might be listening. "Timmy, he used to tell me things. Strange things. Said the woods out there weren't right. That he and the other kids heard whispers on the wind. I thought it was just a child's imagination, but now I wonder if Evelyn knew, if she saw something she couldn't explain." Margaret stared at her. For 50 years, she had fought against wild theories, cults, kidnappings, supernatural tales. Yet here was another mother, her voice trembling with conviction. Clara's words unsettled her, but they also planted a seed of doubt. What if the carvings weren't just desperate scratches, but deliberate warnings Evelyn left behind? The next morning, Margaret returned to the site once more. She asked to see the carvings. Deputy Hale reluctantly allowed her, guiding her into the dim interior of the bus. The air inside was thick with rust and earth. And there, etched into the back of a seat, were the letters DC disappearance. She touched the grooves with her fingertips. The letters were deep, intentional, not random. And beside them, a half-carved word, stay unfinished, as though whoever wrote it had been interrupted. Margaret's breath caught. It was Evelyn's handwriting. She would have recognized that looping SS anywhere. The forest had kept its silence for 50 years. But now, with each carving, with each belonging unearthed, it was starting to whisper. And Margaret realized something chilling. Whatever had taken her sister and those children was not done with them yet. The carvings haunted Margaret's sleep. That night, she dreamed of Evelyn's voice calling her name through the trees, faint and urgent. She woke, drenched in sweat, the letters DC 17 burning in her mind. It wasn't just a code. It was a message. The next day, Deputy Hale called her back to the site. His voice was sharp, his words clipped. "We found something else," he said. When Margaret arrived, the bus was surrounded by a tighter perimeter of tape. Reporters were being held further back, and even the investigators looked uneasy. Hale led her inside, into the stale, dirt-choked air of the bus's interior. "Look," he whispered, pointing at the underside of one of the seats. There, barely visible, was another carving, this one far deeper, more deliberate. The letters spelled out a name, Warren. Margaret's stomach dropped. Warren Carter, her father. The room tilted, her knees nearly giving out. Warren Carter had died in 1986, long after Evelyn disappeared. He had always been a quiet man, a mechanic who kept to himself, haunted but steady. He had searched the woods day and night in those early weeks, his boots muddy, his hands bleeding. He had sworn to anyone who would listen that he would never stop looking for his daughter. And yet, here was his name carved inside the bus. Margaret staggered back. No, this isn't right. He wasn't there. He couldn't have been, but Hale's expression was unreadable. "We don't know what it means, but it was carved from the inside, Mrs. Carter. Someone in this bus knew your father's name." The discovery cracked open something in Margaret she had never dared to question. Memories flooded back, the way Warren had avoided interviews, how he grew more withdrawn as the years passed, how he refused to talk about Evelyn in his final days. Was it grief? Or was it guilt? That evening, Margaret returned home in a daze. She dug through her father's old belongings, boxes she had never opened. At the bottom of one, wrapped in brittle newspaper, she found something she had never seen before, an old journal. Its pages smelled of oil and dust. The handwriting scrawled and hurried. The first entries were ordinary notes about work at the garage, receipts, dates. But as she turned the pages, her breath caught. October 10th, 1972. She's taking them to the gorge. I begged her not to. Not after what I saw. October 11th, 1972. The whispers aren't just in my head. Evelyn says the children hear them too. God forgive me, but I think she's leading them into it. October 12, 1972. The final entry. If anything happens tomorrow, if they don't come back, it won't just be the woods. It will be her. Margaret dropped the journal, her hands trembling, the words blurred before her eyes. Was her sister not the victim after all? Had Evelyn known something? Had she willingly taken those children deeper, against warnings her own father had written down? The town had always painted Evelyn as the saintly teacher who vanished tragically with her class. But what if the truth was darker? What if Evelyn had led them into something or somewhere they were never meant to go? Margaret pressed her palms against her face, sobbing. For 50 years she had defended her sister's memory, fought against every cruel rumor, every suggestion of fault. But now she wasn't sure. And worse, if Evelyn wasn't just an innocent victim, then what had truly happened to those children? The bus was no longer just a grave of rust and memory. It was a doorway into secrets her family had kept locked away, perhaps even from her. Everything Margaret thought she knew about her sister, about her father, about that day in 1972 had just shattered. The past hadn't only stolen Evelyn, it had lied about who she was. The journal consumed Margaret. For days she sat with its pages spread before her, reading and rereading her father's words until they seemed to bleed into her own thoughts. The image of Evelyn, her radiant, hopeful sister, tangled against the possibility that she hadn't been the guardian angel everyone believed, but something else entirely. Maybe a believer in the whispers, maybe a leader, maybe. The cause that the pressure became unbearable when Hale returned one evening with news that shook her. Further, we've finished analyzing the carvings, he told her. The numbers DC-17, they match coordinates. It points to a section of the gorge not on any public maps, a place the forest reclaimed. He hesitated, then added, "And we need you there, Mrs. Carter. If your father and sister both left signs, you may be the only one who can help us understand them." Margaret wanted to refuse. Her whole body screamed against it. But something deeper, the ache of 50 years, forced her to nod. The next morning, she found herself hiking into Hollow Creek Gorge with Hale, 2 officers, and Clara Jennings by her side. The trail grew narrower, the air damper, the silence thicker. Branches clawed at their jackets as though trying to turn them back. Finally, they reached it, a clearing hidden by jagged cliffs, a place untouched for decades. And there, half buried in moss, was another mark, a circle carved into stone. Inside it, the same word scratched desperately over and over, "Stay." Margaret's legs buckled. She could see Evelyn here, crouched with a knife, her hands shaking as she carved the warning, her students clustered behind her. She could almost hear their voices crying, frightened, asking when they could go home. Then came the discovery that shattered everything. One of the officers brushed away dirt near the circle and uncovered a second carving. Words this time, clearer than all the rest. "She told us not to follow her." Margaret staggered backward, her chest heaving. Clara let out a low moan, pressing a trembling hand to her lips. The words weren't Evelyn's handwriting. They were jagged, childish. The handwriting of a student. She left them. Clara choked. Evelyn. She left them alone. Margaret felt her world fracture. She could bear the whispers of cults, the sting of rumors, the ache of uncertainty. But not this. Not the idea that her sister had abandoned 22 terrified children to fate. Her knees hit the dirt as a sob tore from her chest. For the first time in her life, Margaret wished she had never asked for answers. Some shadows were kinder when they stayed hidden. But then Hale crouched beside her, his hand steady on her shoulder. His voice was quiet but urgent. "Or she went on ahead," he said. "Maybe she went looking for a way out. Maybe she sacrificed herself to lead whatever this was away from the children. We don't know, but we're closer than we've ever been." Margaret's tears blurred the forest into colors. She wanted to believe him, but the words carved into the stone echoed louder than his reassurance. "She told us not to follow her." The forest seemed to press closer, listening, waiting. Margaret realized that this was the moment she had feared most, the moment when Evelyn stopped being memory and became truth, and the truth was unbearable. She had reached her breaking point. She could walk away now, let the whispers of 1972 remain unsolved, protect the version of her sister she had cherished all her life, or she could stay, followed the trail deeper into the shadows, and finally confront what Evelyn had really done. Margaret pressed her trembling hand against the stone, tracing the word "stay" carved by her sister's hand. Her voice broke as she whispered into the silence. "I need to know, Evelyn, even if it destroys me." And with that, she stood. The shadows waited. Weeks passed after the carvings in the gorge were found. But for Margaret Carter, time did not move the way it once had. Each day felt suspended, heavy with what she now knew and what she could never fully prove. The official investigation would take months, maybe years, to sift through the bus, the carvings, the journal. Experts argued whether Evelyn had been victim, protector, or betrayer. The town debated in hushed tones, some defending her memory, others sharpening their doubts. But for Margaret, the answers weren't in reports or theories. They were in the silence that followed her everywhere, the silence Evelyn had left behind. She visited the gorge one final time. The site was quiet now, stripped of reporters and investigators, reclaimed by autumn winds. The stone still bore the circle, still held the desperate carvings. "Stay." Margaret laid her hand against it, and for the first time, she did not cry. Instead, she spoke softly, as if Evelyn could still hear her through the decades. "I don't know if you abandoned them. I don't know if you tried to save them, but I know you were there, and I know you left your mark." The truth was complicated, jagged, incomplete like the carvings themselves. Margaret realized she would never have the clean answers she once craved. Closure wasn't about solving the mystery. It was about deciding how much of it she was willing to carry. When she returned home, she opened the box under her bed where she kept Evelyn's scarf and the old permission slip. For 50 years, these had been relics of grief. Now, she folded them gently, kissed the scarf once, and placed them back inside, not as wounds, but as reminders. Clara Jennings visited her a week later. The two women sat across from each other, sharing tea in a silence that was not empty, but shared. They were no longer just mothers and sisters of the missing. They were survivors of a truth no one else would ever fully understand. "You think we'll ever know for certain?" Clara asked. Margaret shook her head, a faint, tired smile tugging at her lips. "No, and maybe we're not meant to. Maybe some shadows aren't here to be chased away. Maybe they're here to remind us what we lost and what we still carry." That night, Margaret sat by her window, as she had every October for half a century. But instead of waiting for Evelyn to come walking back, she whispered goodbye. It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely. It wasn't peace, not completely. But it was enough. The forest outside swayed with the wind, its whispers softer now, almost kind. For Margaret Carter, the story of 1972 would never leave her. But for the first time in 50 years, she felt she could finally leave it. And as she turned off the light, the shadows of Mill Creek held their silence, heavy, watchful, and eternal. In the end, Margaret Carter understood what so few could. Not every shadow hides an answer, and not every silence needs to be broken. The truth of Mill Creek would forever remain scattered, part fact, part rumor, part aching memory carved into stone. But perhaps that was the lesson all along, that life does not always grant resolution, only the courage to carry what is left behind. Some stories close with certainty, but others linger like whispers in the forest, like names etched in rock, like faces lost to time. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is not in finding the truth, but in learning to live with its absence.